All right, guys. So today we are going to talk about the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula, as it says underneath, it says some problems cannot be solved by factoring. The quadratic formula can be used in this situation to find the quadratic roots. So essentially what we're doing here is we're trying to find our roots or our solutions. We're trying to solve it. We can't do it in a very easy way. And that's what this formula right here is going to allow us to do. All right, so this formula, and this will be given to you. It's on your tests. It's on all of your reference sheets. It's on your midterm. It's on the air test. It's on everything for you. So it says x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Now, what this all comes from is this all comes from our standard form of our quadratic equation. Now remember, standard form, like we talked about, is ax squared plus bx plus c, and remember, in our case here, because we're solving, we set it equal to 0. So if we have our equation in standard form, then we can use our values of a, b, and c to plug into this equation. So let's take a look at our example here. Now my example, x squared minus 6x plus 4 equals 0. It's set in standard form. So I have that a is equal to 1, b is equal to negative 6, and c is equal to positive 4. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take what I have here and replace these values with what I have here. All right, so the first thing, I have x equals, it says negative b. Well, my value of b is already negative 6, so this tells me I need to do the opposite of what I have here. So the opposite of negative 6 is positive 6. Then I have my plus or minus sign. I'm going to explain why we have that in a moment. Then I have my square root. I have my b squared, and I'm going to put this in parentheses, so I have negative 6 squared. Minus 4, that's always going to be there, times a times c. Times a is 1, times c is 4. Okay, now notice my square root didn't go all the way over, so I'm going to extend that over the entire thing. And then I'm dividing the entire equation, the entire part, not just the square root, but the entire thing by 2 times a, so that's 2 times a is 1. Okay? So now at this point I've done a majority of the work, now I just have to simplify it. Okay? I'm going to simplify the inside of the square root first. So the 6 is going to remain. The plus and minus stays the same. And now I reduce inside. Negative 6 squared gives me positive 36. Negative 4 times 1 times 4 gives me a negative 16. And then I'm dividing by 2 times 1, or 2. The only other thing I can do here first is subtract the 36 and the 16. So I have 6 plus or minus the square root of 20 divided by 2. Okay? Now I could go through and simplify the square root of 20 into the square root of 4 times the square root of 5, make it 2 square root of 5, but I can also just type this into my calculator. Okay? So I'm going to pull up the Desmos calculator real quick. All right, so I'm going to go to desmos.com. So I'm going to type this in. You could do this in your in the scientific version too. So what I'm going to do is I have 6 plus, and then I'm going to do the square root of 20. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the entire thing and hit divide so that I can do the entire thing underneath, and I'm going to divide that by 2. Okay, so that's what I have there. All right, and so you want to make sure, and if I go back to this, you want to make sure that it looks in the way that you want. You have 6 plus the square root of 20 divided by 2, and then 6 minus the square root of 20 divided by 2. So we're actually going to do both here. I'm going to then do 6 minus the square root of 20, highlight the entire thing, divided by 2. So now these are my two answers. These are my two solutions. The 5.236, I'm going to round that to 2 decimals, make it 5.24. And same thing here, 0.7639, I'm going to make that 0.76. So that tells me that my two solutions are going to be 0.76 and 5.24. Okay? Because this is essentially two answers here. This is 6 plus square root 20 divided by 2, and 6 minus square root 20 divided by 2. All right, so those are our two answers. Those are the two roots, the two values that we can find in our graph. Okay, so and we can see that here. I'm going to graph this real quick. If I do x raised to the second minus 6x plus 4, okay, that's our equation. We have 0.764 and 5.236. So we get the same values there. Okay. Let's take a look at another one here. Okay. Let's take a look at number 1. We'll do numbers 1, 3, and 5 here for this video. Okay. So number 1, it is set equal to standard form because it's set equal to 0. So I'm good. My value of a is what's in front of the x squared, so a is 1. B is in front of the x, so b is 10. And c is the constant, -2. All right. So I have x equals -b is the first thing. So the opposite of 10 is -10, plus or minus the square root of b squared, that's 10 squared, minus 4 times a is 1 times c is -2. All divided by 2 times a, or 2 times 1. So let's simplify. I have the -10. I have the plus and minus. Square root. 10 squared gives me 100. -4 times 1 times -2 is +8. Divided by 2. Okay. The 100 plus 8 gives us 108. So we have -10 plus or minus the square root of 108 divided by 2. So again, we have two answers. We have -10 plus square root 108 divided by 2, and -10 minus square root 108 divided by 2. So I'm going to use my calculator. I'll get rid of these guys. So we have -10 plus then the square root of 108, all divided by 2. That gives me 0.196. That's going to round up to 0.20. So we have x equals, we've got 0.20 as one of them. Okay. And then the other one, if we did -10 plus, we're going to do -10, -10 minus the square root of 108, all divided by 2. Sorry about that. -10 minus the square root of 108. I forgot to hit the division sign, by 2. And that gives us -10.196. 196, or negative 10.20. So we have negative 10.20. All right, so those are our two solutions there. All right, let's look at number 3. Now, number 3, do you see how it's not set equal to 0? We have to make that equal to 0. We have to subtract the 20 over onto both sides. So that gives us x squared minus 8x minus 20 is equal to 0. If we don't set it equal to 0, we have different values of a, b, and c. So then we get different solutions. So that means that a is 1, b is negative 8, and c is negative 20. Okay, so we have x equals negative b, or the opposite of b, which b is negative 8, so that gives us a positive 8, plus and minus the square root of b squared, so that's negative 8 squared, minus 4 times a is 1, times c is negative 20. Okay, all divided by 2 times a, or 2 times 1. All right, so let's reduce. So we get 8 plus or minus the square root. Negative 8 squared is positive 64. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 20 is positive 80. And we're dividing it all by 2. Now what's nice here is when we add the 64 and the 80, so we have 8 plus or minus the square root of 144, which you should recognize as one of our perfect squares. If we take a look at our list of perfect squares, 144 is in our list. So we have a square root of 144. So I'm going to immediately just reduce that to 12. So I have 8 plus or minus 12 divided by 2. So now at this point, I don't have any decimals because now I can just add these and subtract these. So my first answer, I'm going to call this x1, is going to be 8 plus 12 over 2. 8 plus 12 is 20. Divided by 2 gives us 10. So there's my first answer, is 10. And then x2, my second answer, is going to be 8 minus 12. So I have 8 minus 12 divided by 2. 8 minus 12 is negative 4. Divided by 2, that gives me negative 2. So those are my two solutions. And let's check. Let's check our graph here. All right, I'm going to get rid of these guys. So I should have positive 10 and a negative 2, right? That's what we got. Let's double check. Yep, positive 10, negative 2. So if we take a look here, we have x squared minus 8x is equal to 20. If we type that in, we get negative 2 and positive 10. Perfect. All right. One more problem here. Let's take a look at number 5. Okay, so number 5, it's already set equal to 0, so we're good there. So I have that a is 1, b is 6, and c is 10. Okay, so let's plug these in. We have x equals negative b is negative 6. Plus or minus the square root b squared, that's 6 squared, minus 4 times a is 1, times c is 10. Okay, all divided by 2 times a, or 2 times 1. So we're going to reduce inside. We have negative 6 plus or minus the square root. 6 squared is 36. Negative 4 times 1 times 10 is negative 40, divided by 2. So I'm going to add the 36 minus 40. So that gives me a negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 divided by 2. Now, one thing you should notice here is this negative underneath the square root. As soon as you get a negative underneath the square root, if you know you're doing this right, you can't do this problem, okay? Because if I try to type this in, if I try to type in the square root of negative 4, it tells me it's undefined. We can't do it. And if you look and if you think back to what we did with the discriminant, this is the discriminant. If I go back to the equation here, b squared minus 4ac, that's the discriminant. That tells us how many solutions we have. And when that discriminant is 0, we have no solution. So all we can do here is say x is equal to no solution. Okay? So that's all we've got. All right? So let's I want you to go ahead and continue and work on these next couple of problems. We can go through those in class together. Make sure they are written in standard form. Take a look here at number 9. I'm going to highlight that one real quick. That's an important one for you to make sure it's in standard form with. All right? Be on the lookout for the next video, guys.